Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Collision Den here to talk about the new movie Bob Marley, One Love. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So I'm not necessarily the biggest Bob Marley fan in the world, although I have enjoyed his music from time to time. I think despite a very tragically short life, he died the same age that I am now. He continues to cast a very large shadow just over the history of music. And I think because he was such a complex person, he was a musician, he was a national hero, and he was a spiritual guru in a sense that I think the anthems that he wrote still continue to resonate with people even to today. So it makes sense that he would get a feature picture sort of on his life and on his legacy and on his music. And he obviously wrote a lot of hit songs, but obviously not every kind of budding musical idea flourishes. I think a songwriter, they can have a catchy melody, they can have an infectious kind of rhythm and even snippets of profound lyrics and still not be able to fashion those elements into a successful song. And I think that's probably how I would describe this movie as well. I think it suffers a similar problem from that. This movie does, on the surface at least, seem to have all the necessary elements for a very compelling biop. It's well acted. I think it's thematically interesting, but as a cohesive and kind of compelling portrait of its interesting subject, I think the story falls almost surprisingly flat. I don't think this is a bad movie. I actually like this movie quite a bit, but I think it is a kind of a lukewarm movie that just leaves a lot of unfulfilled potential. So musical biopics often you kind of fall back on very similar story structures and tropes, and I think One Love is no different in that regards, although it does seek to sort of stand out by foregoing a very kind of conventional, approach of just tracing the historical figure from life until death. And instead, this film takes, I think, a more interesting approach of focusing in kind of more narrowly on an important period of Bob Marley's life, which is sort of the explosion of his worldwide fame and kind of the culmination of his music and his message in the 1978 One Love peace concert. And so while there are occasional flashbacks that do kind of fill in some of the gaps in Bob Marley's personal history, the movie itself strives for something a little loftier and kind of this exploration of sort of the relationship between art and the artist, and also art and just society at large. This movie very much is a celebration of Bob Marley. Even like a pre-film greeting by his son Ziggy Marley assures audiences that the family was very involved in the process and development of this movie. And I think probably as a result of that, the movie does, I think, gloss over some of the more complicated aspects of Marley's life and does choose to portray him more to sort of like the classic, tortured musical genius, which is maybe my biggest critique of this film, because an unfortunate consequence of that very favorable portrayal, and also I think the creative decision to focus on more kind of thematic, wide-level aspects, is that Bob Marley as a man in this is largely held at a distance. I think the film kind of offers audiences a more surface level picture into this man's life without exploring kind of his more deeper internal struggles and conflicts. Because I left this movie having gained, I think, a greater understanding of the impact of Marley's music and his legacy on the world, but Marley himself still remained very enigmatic. But where this movie succeeds, I think, is that it is bolstered by several very strong performances. Kingsley Ben-Adir plays Bob Marley, and he's great. He completely disappears into the role, and I think he is able to capture some of that kind of laid back, kind of easy charisma of Bob Marley. But to me, the standout performance in this is Latasha Lynch, who plays Rita Marley, who is Bob Marley's wife. I think as she did in the movie The Woman King, she demonstrates that she is just a powerhouse actress. She is excellent in this. I think she gives the best performance. And I think the scenes, especially the more dramatic scenes between those two characters, such as there's a scene, kind of a heated argument in the streets of Paris between those two, really does elevate this film and I think adds some very much needed kind of dynamism. And as should be expected, there is plenty of music in this. Like I said, Bob Marley is not necessarily a staple on my regular playlist, but I thought the music in this was done well. And I think there is enough variation in how those scenes are framed to keep it from growing stale. There's concerts and there's rehearsals and even like a very stimulating scene where you sort of watch Marley and his band write their hit song Exodus in real time. But despite all of those kind of individual elements that I do think are solid, this film kind of feels like a race car driver that keeps revving his engine, but just doesn't doesn't ever get around to just stomping on the gas pedal. I think this movie is at its best when it's exploring like the complexity of its subject rather than just sort of giving a play-by-play kind of Wikipedia summary of Bob Marley's career. But it just seems like the filmmakers don't commit to kind of either of those paths, the more thematic and the more traditional historical biopic, with enough conviction to gain momentum. And kind of because it goes back and forth, there's moments where Bob Marley is beginning to wrestle internally with like the weight of his message and his responsibility, and then that's cut short to show a flashback or to show a concert. But even like the more historical elements of his career just feels very incomplete. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this film, there's really not a whole lot that I notice. Language, I will say, due to the very kind of heavy Jamaican accents in this, it is sometimes difficult to understand all of the dialogue. I heard something that may have sounded like one F word and maybe one or two other profanities, although I can't be 100% certain about that. Violence, there's no real violence. There's sort of like political unrest and stuff like in the background of the story. But as far as the immediate characters and in this, several of them do get shot either in the chest or the head, and although they live, you do see sort of blood on their clothes. As far as sexuality, really nothing here either. There is like allusions to in conversation that characters have had several like extramarital affairs, although those aren't depicted on screen. And a man does become jealous of his when he thinks another man is flirting with his wife, but nothing really beyond that. Maybe just other kind of content stuff. Drugs are visible in plenty of scenes, and they do play a more like prominent role in just sort of his spiritual beliefs and religion. So there is some scenes that focus on that, and also, like I said, just the spirituality. We'll get to into that in more detail in just a second. But there is kind of Marley's religious beliefs are very prominently explored and shown throughout this film. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface of this film, I do think there are several interesting things for Christians to take note of. And kind of the main theme to me that I saw was just sort of this tension between the message and the messenger. Because Bob Marley really saw no distinction between the music and the message, where his songs were never intended just to be like mere entertainment, but they very much, in his eyes, were like a pulpit for him to spread this gospel of love and kind of spiritual oneness. And kind of throughout the film, you do see the emotional weight of that responsibility in his life. And kind of near the end of this film, there's a scene where Marley he's reached a low point. He's burdened by that struggle, and he makes the comment, says, "How can I bring peace? I can't even get peace for myself." And although he doesn't fully realize it at the time, he has lost his way. There is kind of a growing disconnect between the message that he proclaims and then the life that he is living, which leaves his wife to urge him, saying, "Sometimes the messenger must become the message." And Bob Marley, his spiritual beliefs were not Christian, but I do think Christians can relate to that struggle. I think like James, when he writes, in the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead, James 2:17, that there is a synergy between kind of word and deed. Kind of as St. Francis of Assisi famously said, preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words. And this idea that kind of belief is not just a message that we proclaim with our mouth, but it is sort of a way of life that informs our thoughts and words and deeds. And in this film, Bob Marley kind of demonstrates that finding that harmony is not always easy to achieve. He declares in an interview at the end of this film, "My life doesn't matter to me. My life is for people." And he does, in some scenes, back that assertion up, such as I think one of the more profound scenes in this movie, where he does offer forgiveness to a man that had attempted to assassinate him. On the other hand, while kind of preaching this gospel of just sort of loving people, Marley himself does leave his family and his kids behind to travel to the UK and live and write songs. And there's allusions to affairs that he has had with other women. So there's definitely some complexity to that, but I think the overall message of just kind of the synergy between message and messenger is a good one for Christians to contemplate. Maybe one other sort of worldview thing going on just to note is just, like I said, Bob Marley's religion, his Rastafari religion is very central to his life and also in like the lyrics of his songs. And that religion is based on a very specific interpretation of the Christian Bible. Kind of as a result of that, biblical language is very prevalent throughout this film and throughout the lyrics and the songs that play. Even the movie itself, the opening scene is someone giving Bob Marley a Bible, and later you see him reading from the Bible, and kind of their hit song Exodus is clearly based on sort of the imagery of Moses leading out the Israelites from Egypt. But despite some of that overlap, the religion is incompatible with sort of Orthodox Christianity. And among other things, it does sort of hold this belief that, the emperor, the Ethiopian emperor that had lived and died was the second coming of Jesus, and that he would kind of come back again and kind of bring liberty and kind of unite the people of Africa. And you do see several scenes where Marley is sort of being taught some of these beliefs and kind of about who God is in ways that I think is inconsistent with this reading of the Bible. And even just the role that drugs play in this religion, and how, in their view, the smoking of marijuana sort of leads to this heightened kind of spiritual awareness. So there is a lot of focus on spiritual things, religious things going on all throughout this film. And I think Christian viewers will just need to kind of compare what they see and kind of how that religion kind of lines up with what they read in the Bible. So in the end, I think this movie is perfectly fine. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's great. I think it is a little too unfocused to explore its subject with the depth that would be needed to elevate it beyond anything other than just sort of a standard musical biopic. I think the solid acting and just the captivating musical sequences do make Bob Marley, One Love an entertaining movie, but I think kind of with the larger-than-life subject matter, I think the film, at least for me, left me feeling more like I got the B side of the story rather than the main event. But hey, if you see this movie, would love to hear what you think, what your opinions are. And if you're a big fan of Bob Marley or just looking for an interesting story, jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about that. And if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys to subscribe to our channel, become a Collider, get lots of movie reviews and podcasts and interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to Collider through World for Christ.